well, prove to me God doesn't exist. Well, that's a big problem. The problem is you can't prove a negative. You can prove it mathematically, of course, but whenever you're talking about philosophically, you just can't prove a negative. It's nearly impossible. You can't say something doesn't exist when there's no evidence for it. A good example would end up being, and this is one of my favorite people, is James Randi. Some people know him. He's one of the main reasons why I am the way I am. I'm a huge skeptic when it comes to things. I always play devil's advocate. Whenever, one of the analogies that he gave was, well, prove to me reindeer can't fly. And that seems really absurd. But it's funny because I've used this several times, and almost every single time they look at me like I'm just absolutely crazy. I'm like, no, no, no. Prove to me that reindeer can't fly. How would you conduct an experiment to prove that? And they're like, well, and a lot of them won't give you any information, but you can just bait their answer. Say, well, okay, so what if I take 1,000 reindeer and I put them on top of a building and I push each one off one by one? I push the first one off and it falls to its death. Have I proven anything? No. If I take the rest of them and I keep pushing them to the ground, that none of them flew. Have I proven anything? No. You can't prove a negative. The importance behind that is that you can take all the reindeer in the world, push every single one of them off of a cliff or a tall building, they'll fall to their death. Does that mean that that extra one might have? Or does that mean that under the certain conditions they didn't want to fly, they don't like being pushed? It's just exploring that, and that's really, it's just a fun analogy. It seems somewhat absurd, but it's fun. A lot of people can see that experiment. You haven't proven anything because you haven't explored all the variables. So, prove to me that God doesn't exist, the best thing is that since they're making the claim, prove to me God does exist. And that is an awesome one, because what I love about that one is it really starts to show them thinking. It really starts to show how they think and the level that they think at. And a lot of times they'll bring up, well, such and such happened, and that can't be explained. Okay, well, that's fine. You don't have to explain everything. It's okay with saying, I don't know. And by asking them, prove to me God does exist, a lot of times they will say, well, what about the miracle of DNA? What about the miracle of childbirth? What about, I prayed for somebody and then it happened? Okay, so that's going to be a little bit of a hard one, because they come at you with a lot of different things. There's not one little set answer because it's a personal thing to them. And so what they'll end up basically proving amongst themselves is the God of the gaps. Because they have a huge gap in understanding of how things work, means that they're just inserting God. It's exactly what they've done in old times. A lot of people are familiar with Thor, God of thunder. Just imagine being 3,000 years ago, and you're out and storms come and you have these large lightning bolts that are crashing down, and they just seem so supernatural. I mean, I can do the same thing. Just seeing how that big lightning bolt would come down and the sound that comes from it, I can completely understand how you would just immediately jump into something that's supernatural. It just almost seems logical at that point, because there's just no good explanation. But it's the times. We understand what lightning is. We understand what thunder is. We understand how earthquakes happen. We understand a lot of these different large things that once had gods associated to them. Thus, the gods went away. With the God of the gaps, there's so many different things, and that's really what I always strive to point out, is the holes in their belief. The problem with being who we are is they have a single book. I already said they have all the answers. They just don't have any of the questions. The only thing they really need to look at is that one book, and that's a problem to us, because they're going to come at us from needing to know astronomy and geology and biology and all these different areas that they're going to ask these questions. And just because they ask a question to us that we don't know, they think that they got us. But it's okay to say, I don't know. Man, that's the whole point of being an agnostic, is why have the fight? Why even talk about it if we can't prove positive or negative? So to really try to exploit those holes and to say, well, I'm perfectly happy with saying I don't know. And as long as you can get into that conversation with them, then you can kind of lead to other things, as far as they'll end up asking, well, where did you come from? How can you explain how you're here? Well, my parents made it. And they're like, well, okay. And then they'll go a little bit deeper, and they'll say, well, how did the human race get here? Well, we evolved. Well, then a lot of times the knee-jerk reaction, they'll say, well, evolution is just a theory. Yeah, we'll get back to that one. The theory thing is really funny. We get into evolution, we get into the Big Bang. Whenever they start going down that road, they're trying to back you into a corner. And what they're really trying to go is to see the extent of your knowledge. How far back do you go? And can you say that, yes, we evolved from primates. Yes, we evolved from lower life forms, single-celled organisms. Yes, we're all stardust. Well, that's just too big to them. They think, well, okay, so that means you believe in the Big Bang. I'm like, yeah. I mean, it's a lot of people, and a lot of people of a lot of different religions, a lot of people that are behind science understand the Big Bang, and it just makes sense. And they're saying, but what happens before the Big Bang? We don't know. And they're saying, well, why don't you know? Well, because all data, that's as far back as our data can go. We don't have any way to be able to, once everything expanded from that singular point, we don't know what happened before that. And then we go, well, don't you think maybe God could have done that? And you're like, what happened? Where did God come from? And they're like, well, God's always been. Well, how can God always been? And the problem that they're trying to come at you with is everything has a cause. And everything has to have a meaning for that cause. And so God wanted us to exist, so He willed into the universe. Well, who willed God into existence? And that's the problem, is where did God start? The thing with the Big Bang, and a good analogy, is you can only go so far south before you start going north. The Big Bang is the beginning of time. It's the beginning of space. It's the beginning of everything that we know. What happened before that, we don't know. Is the universe expand and contract? We don't know. There's different theories. But we just don't know, and it's okay to say that. Just don't know. The where did God come from is the exact same thing that we say whenever we say we don't know about the Big Bang. So if you can get them to say, well, I don't know. And you're like, great. I don't know either. And that's okay. And then it's funny because you start to see it kind of break down with them. And I've had that several times where if I get somebody to agree with me that they don't know and I don't know, then it's almost like the whole demeanor and everything as far as the conversation and where it's going just breaks down, and it starts to be a little bit more humble once you actually agree on something. If they're coming into it, depending upon who you're talking to, they'll end up coming into it in kind of a, like they're getting ready for a fight. And that sucks, because that means that they've built this wall and you can't really penetrate. But there's a couple little things that you can say to kind of help bring that back. You know, obviously watching your body language and things like that kind of helps make people a little bit more calm. But getting them to agree with you, that's one of my favorite things to do, is just get them to say, I don't know. They'll start going into different things about evolution that just doesn't make sense to them. They've never researched it, so they don't know for a fact exactly what's happened. Whenever you're taking evolution, and just to kind of give you a brief idea, if everybody's not up to snuff on that, evolution is just one thing evolving into the next and the next and the next. Whenever you have evolution, you're left with things from the previous version. One of the things they'll ask is, hey, if we evolved from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? Okay, we evolved from ape-like ancestors. We didn't evolve from monkeys, but we took two different paths. Whenever we evolved, we started taking one path, and they decided to stay in the trees, and that's what worked best for them, and this is what worked best for us. We took two different paths. It's the same thing for wolves, domesticated dogs, lions versus cats. It's just two different branches. They'll say, well, that's fine, and just because we look the same doesn't mean we're related. Well, that means that they don't understand a lot about the fossil record. The fossil record, and Richard Dawkins is famous about this, is that he is always going after creationists. He's always combating the people about creationism and how to link everything. The problem with a lot of creationists is they're really stuck in their own mode of thinking that we are not related. So you say, okay, so here's a monkey, here's an ape. There's no link in between. So what they typically will do is, and just giving you kind of a background idea here, let's say man is 10, the number 10, and then apes are, let's say, the number 100. If we show them the fossil record at 50, they'll say, well, that's not a link. What happened between 10 and 50? We show them in the middle, then we show them in the middle, we show them in the middle, and they never actually see the whole thing and the whole evolutionary process. And they always say, well, where's the missing link? Well, that's something that obviously you can't show them right there because that's stupid, but inviting them to go to different websites like Richard Dawkins and just anybody that is a non-religious source. You go to creationist museums or creationist websites, of course they're not going to give you any kind of good evidence, but having these people understand how to debate, I'm sorry, not how to debate, but how to look up information will help them expand their mind in other directions as well. So inviting them to go to the websites, go to the internet and look for missing link, and actually Google that, you'll find a whole lot of information on the different stages of evolution and how we got to where we are and the commonality that we have between us and a lot of animals. So it's just fun because it's still the God of the gaps thing. They're thinking that we are perfect, we're in the image of man. Whenever we have, talking about the fossil record, one of the questions I like to say after I talk about the evolution is, do you really believe we're created in the image of God? And some people, the majority of people believe that we are physically in the image of God. God is just like us. The other people think that we're God-like, meaning we think the same way as God. But those are very few and far between. Most of the people that I run into, whether it be coworkers, family members, people while I'm doing outreach, are the people that we believe we're the exact same. The problem is because, like I said earlier about evolution, having to deal with the previous step, we have a lot of junk, not only a lot of junk DNA, but mainly we have a lot of junk things with ourselves. That's called vestigiality. Those are things that are left over from previous versions of us that we now have. There's a huge list. My very first one that I always bring up is the appendix. The appendix is just an organ. More people die from having an appendix than not having the appendix. There's no, if you get it taken out, the only risk to actually dying is the risk of an infection from the doctor. If you don't have any infection, you live a long, healthy life, no dietary change, no nothing. You can completely live without any appendix. The vestigial organ, where that comes from, is whenever we lived in trees and we ate a lot of leaves, it takes a lot to break that down. So the appendix is really there for cellulose breakdown. So for people that do eat a lot of leaves, yes, it aids, but it's not a necessity for life. You can completely not have that organ. There's a huge list of things that are vestigial organs. Your fingernails are vestigial from whenever we actually had claws and we needed to grab branches. Whenever you get scared, each one of your hairs on your arm has little muscles attached to it that raise up. That is a vestigial organ or vestigial piece. There's no need for it. Animals, whenever they get scared, they poof up to make themselves look bigger. We don't need that. Why do we have that? Not automatically saying, bam, evolution, but the point is that just like they bombard you with questions, you can bombard them with facts. Like, why do we have an appendix? Why do each one of our hairs have a little muscle attached to it? Why can I wiggle my ears? Why do my ears have this little point called the Darwin's peak on it? Those are just vestigial things. Let's talk about the ears, since a lot of people have the little point here at the corner that's folded in. Everybody's reaching for their ears. The thing with that, that's called the Darwin's peak. If you look at a lot of animals, say like dogs and other mammals, they'll end up having pointy ears. The whole point of that, of course, is just a cone, and whenever you have the muscles that control the ear to be able to let them articulate so they can focus. Well, I can wiggle my ears, and I also have the little point back here. There's no need to wiggle your ears. There's no need for the point. Another thing is they will talk about, I'll expand upon the vestigiality. Also, your tailbone. It's called the tailbone. Yes, muscles attached to it just like they attach to every other thing in your body, but it's a tailbone. I was talking about junk DNA earlier. There are people that have lived and died, and it's documented, that actually that part of the DNA has been turned on to allow that tail to actually grow. And there's a lot of people out there that have had actual tails to grow from the tailbone. It's weird. A lot of people have had hair cover their entire body whenever we were covered with hair of our entire body. People have had pointy ears to be able to articulate the ears. All that data is out there, and it's in the record, and it's you can go to Ripley's, believe it or not, and it's fun because all those things are out there. So vestigiality,